All right. So, like I said, like today, I wanted to spend our time mostly talking about how to buy good bottles of wine that are both going to taste good, and that if you have to bring them somewhere, you feel good about showing up with as a gift or as something that you're bringing to a party or something that you're serving at your house when you're having people over. If you have some wine nerd friends who are showing up, people get really intimidated about what wine they pick. I see it every day because people come into the store and they are so nervous about what to buy for their friend who loves wine and what to serve for dinner, because they have friends who know a lot more about wine than they do, and it causes a lot of anxiety. So I'm trying to sort of give people easy tips to avoid that anxiety, and also some ideas about what you might look for if you're trying to go in and buy wine. So the I think
Meanwhile, I'm drinking one of our wines from last week.
Oh, good, great.
The
Which one are
Côte
you
du Rhône.
drinking?
The Côte du Rhône.
Oh, good, excellent. I've got the Gavi in my glass, but I'm Coravanning tonight because I did not want to wash more than one glass. So.
It sounds.
So the most of when you get into price issues is when you're looking at big names, both big winery names and big region names, words that people really recognize. And that's when you get into big price tags. So a lot of wine people will go for big labels like Camus, if they can afford it, Opus One, or things that conjure up certain names. And if they're not in that price range, they'll go for things that show up on like steakhouse menus, things like some of the higher end Justin, or even the regular range Justin Cab, which runs about $25 to $30. They'll go for those kind of names. Duckhorn is kind of the $100 range, and then they've got their canvas back at around 50 and their decoy around 25. So different lines within that. People will often go for those wines. But I mean, those are fine. Those are fine wines to buy. But often, if you're on a budget, like really on a budget, you don't necessarily want to spend even $25 on a bottle of wine, let alone 50 or 100. And you want to show up at a party and be respectable and have the people who are with you enjoy the wine and have a sense that you cared and that you didn't just go and spend $10, $15 on whatever you could find, which sometimes, depending on what area you live in, is a necessity, but sometimes you can't do anything else. But so my first tip for people who are trying to buy wine that looks impressive, tastes impressive, but is at a budget that is definitely below $20, usually below 15, is to look at value regions of the world. So we're not looking at wines from Napa. We're not going to look for wines from Bordeaux. You can find cheap wines from Bordeaux, but you shouldn't. unless you are there. It's not a good idea. Unless you really know what you're looking for, it's just not a good idea. And you can find cheap wines from Napa, but again, like that's not a great idea. They're usually mass produced. They're often full of additives and things that are not great for you to make them taste a particular way, and they're bad for the planet and for you as a person. So looking at value regions. So value regions are places that are lesser known, or they're becoming known, but because they are still producing wine predominantly for their own citizens, the people who are there, and those people are not going to pay more than a certain amount for a bottle of wine. They're not expecting that price tag. I'm having motorcycles going by, so pleasant. So places like Spain, although Spain is getting more pricey.
Okay.
Portugal is definitely in this category.
Okay.
I was listening to a podcast today about Portugal, and most Portuguese wineries are still producing wine for their own country. And people in Portugal don't make as much money as we do in the US on the whole. And they can't pay as much per bottle, and they won't.
Mhm.
So the prices of Portuguese wine are very low. Chile is another one. Chile became known for producing pretty bad quality wine for a long time. So they were putting out a lot of wine, but selling to a lot of American companies and doing a lot of mass-produced things. But Chile is really beginning to turn around, and Argentina as well. They're putting out a lot of really good quality wine that is at a pretty good, pretty reasonable price. So looking at those kind of regions, or if you're looking in the US, instead of looking at Napa or Sonoma, looking at Paso Robles or Washington State, which if you love American Cabernet, Paso Robles is a good place to look, or Washington State. Washington State does a lighter style of Cabernet usually, but very good. High
well, that
quality.
might appeal to me.
What?
That might appeal to me.
Yeah, I love the Cabs from Washington. Yeah. So a little less heavy, which I think is good. So yeah. So value regions are good to pursue. You're also looking for lesser known grapes. So instead of trying to look for a Merlot or a Cab Franc, you might look for a Carmenere, which is common in Chile. Or instead of a Zinfandel, which you can get cheap Zinfandels, but if you're looking for decent Zinfandel, it can easily run into the $40, $50 range. Or you can get Primitivo from Italy, which is the same grape, essentially. There are some debates in the wine world about whether it's exactly the same or not really the same, but genetically they are almost identical. And bottles of good Primitivo are quite inexpensive, and can look very impressive, and taste impressive, which is even more important. Or if you like Cabernet Sauvignon, you might look for a Tannat from Uruguay, or a Nero d'Avola from southern Italy. So things that are a little less known. How you might know about those things would be to ask your friendly neighborhood wine consultant. So yeah, I mean, some areas are easier for this than others. So if you have a good wine shop with someone who's knowledgeable, definitely that is a good place to start, is to give someone honestly your price range and your occasion and what you like, and let them help you. But I know that that's not always a possibility in every area that people live. So sometimes you're going to a liquor store with individual sizes of Fireball, but not wine.
Exactly.
And a pretty easy way to get good quality, lower priced wines is to drink more white wine.
Oh, okay.
Often my advice to people is like, start drinking white wine, which dedicated red wine drinkers do not want to do often, but like ease in with some things that have a little more body, which is one of the reasons that I brought the Chenin Blanc into tonight, is because it's got a little more weight to it and a little more structure. So often it will be friendlier to red wine drinkers. And rosés can also be just automatically off the bat. People command less money for whites and rosés.
Sure.
So drink more light wine.
It's fair.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk a little bit about bulk wine, because usually when people go looking for wine, there's first of all, a certain comfort zone. Like there's the producers that you've heard about, labels that look familiar. And there's the cost, which is low. So just being aware that a lot of the lowest cost wines, especially if you're going to something like a Trader Joe's or sometimes Costco, some of these places to buy wine, some of the wines there are relabels, or what's called shiners in the industry, where there's a mass production company and they just send out bottles that are unlabeled, and you can label them with whatever you want.
Oh, wow.
So the private label, one of the ways that Trader Joe's is able to offer so many deep discounts is because they buy shiners and they label them with their own label, which isn't always bad. Some of that wine people really like, and it is often produced for a very broad palate. It appeals to a lot of people.
Okay.
We make it to that palate, but it's not very exciting, and it's not super responsible in terms of what we're doing environmentally. And often those are the wines that are going to give you headaches.
All right, then.
Because they're full of sulfites and they're full of additives. And when people complain about headaches, I ask them what they're drinking. And often those are the things that they're drinking are bulk wines that are, everything is mechanized. Everything, the fields are sprayed full of chemicals. All the farming is mechanized. In order to stop fermentation, it's a ton of sulfites. They're adding other things to it. They're adding sugar. They're adding preservatives. That stuff gives you headaches. And yes, it is inexpensive, but you don't have to buy that in order to get inexpensive, good wine. You can get better wine for the same price.
Makes sense.
Yeah. And often,
that's true of almost any food product that places like that sell as private label.
Right.
Sometimes you're really lucky, and sometimes it's like, well, no wonder somebody sold it to them so that they could put it out at this price.
Exactly. Sometimes you buy it and you're like, oh, well, it turns out I was paying a bunch of money for a label, and now I don't have to pay for the label. I'm just paying for the product.
Yeah.
And other times it's not, the label said something.
Yeah.
Yeah. And some bulk wine, it really is a matter of knowing your producer. So some of the bulk wines have been known for years for producing consistent wines that are pretty good quality. They're not amazing. They're not going to blow your socks off. But like Kendall Jackson, I don't drink Kendall Jackson Chardonnay. That's not a palate that I enjoy, but they've been putting out consistent wine for a long time. And they also have been putting the research in on the back end to doing things the right way, and producing wine that is not as harmful as some of the other things that are being grown at that scale. They're also investing in all of the other wineries that are in their portfolio, and doing really interesting things. And they've kind of found a way to use that baseline Kendall Jackson label to fund the rest of the things that they're doing that are super interesting in the wine world. So, that's it. When in doubt, that's one that you can look for, is like, oh, well, what's under the Kendall Jackson portfolio? Because I know that they care about putting out a consistent quality product. Or Chateau Saint Michel is another one that, like, I don't love that wine. It tends to be a little sweet for me, but they've been putting out quality product at a fairly low cost for a really long time. So I'm not trying to vilify all domestic bulk wine.
Well, and sometimes I have read about or heard about small wineries that primarily, it seems to me, as they're getting started,
Mhm.
that they're buying either the grapes or the juice or something from other places and then blending their own and
Yeah.
processing it from there.
Yep. Yeah, that's definitely almost no one can afford to just buy vineyard land.
Mhm.
And it just that is almost, unless you're already independently wealthy. And then it takes forever to plant the vines that you want. It's 3 years easily before they're producing. You know,
Wow.
winemaking is not a cheap and often not even a lucrative enterprise. So yeah. Yeah, which kind of went into my next point of like, can you actually get a good wine for under $15 in the USA? Yes. I mean, but you have to be, yes, but you have to be a little,
Guarded yes is what I'm hearing.
what?
A guarded yes is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I just think it's a lot easier to get one that is from Spain or Portugal or a lesser known area of
Sure.
France, something that's not Burgundy or Bordeaux in France, or like, I just think it's easier to find
Mhm.
quality wine that doesn't have a bunch of garbage in it, that is often made organically, either certified or they're using as close to organic practices as they can. That is just a lot easier in the EU or in South America than it is in the US.
Sure.
So usually if somebody comes in and they're like, I really need to blow away my dinner guests and I have $15,
Uh-huh.
like, okay, like we're gonna look at a Portuguese red blend, or we're gonna look at a Cote d'Aron, or a something like a Cab Franc from the Loire Valley that's kind of a lesser known producer, or we're going to look at an Argentinian, a better Malbec or a Cabernet or a Cab Franc from Argentina, or a Carmenere from Chile, because those things are it's just easier.
Sure.
And I can be pretty much assured that they're going to taste better.
Yes.
When in doubt, when you are shopping for wine, especially from other countries, although this is true in the US too, uh, the place that it comes from is really important. What it's part of what's referred to as terroir, but it's like the geography of wine and the laws around that geography are really important. So in general, like the more information it gives you, the more specific it is about where the wine is from, better.
Okay.
So if I'm looking at a wine that says wine from Italy,
Thank you very much.
I'm highly unlikely to buy that wine.
Sure.
Because I'm like, what does that even mean? I don't know. Or even sort of northern Italy. So, or some wines will be labeled. So Gavi, which is the first thing that I am drinking here, that's from a region called Piedmont or Piemonte. And so you can get ones that are labeled Piemonte. This is actually labeled DOCG. There are some that are in Italy. You have 3 tiers of labeling. So you have an IGT, which is a integration. I can't say things in Italian. I'm sorry. Indication of geographical typicity, basically, which is the lowest level. Then you have a DOC, the denomination of origin. And then you have a DOCG, which is guaranteed denomination of origin, which is an even smaller designation. And this one isn't just from Piedmont. It's from Del Comune de Tassorolo. It's from the village. Like,
Okay.
you're
So
identifying.
it's not as specific as a single winery.
No, I mean, it will tell you what winery. All of them tell you
Well,
what
yeah.
winery.
Yeah.
The very specific piece of land that came from.
Mhm.
And you can, within like certain wine producers, they also will tell you that it's a single vineyard wine,
Yeah.
that
Okay,
all
that's
the
what
grapes
brings
come
sense.
from that, or that it's estate bottled, which means that the grapes were both grown and made into wine in the same place.
Okay.
And that's usually an indication of quality. Some winemakers just don't have the money to do that, so
Sure.
that comes with some flexibility. But this one is Comune de Tesarolo, so tiny little commune village that it's identifying, which means it's been more tightly controlled and is probably better quality.
Sure.
So pretty darn good wine for like $18.
Okay.
I went a little higher than 15 on that one because I had it in my house already.
Fair.
I put on the list for this evening a lot of suggestions of Italian white wines.
Mm-hmm.
It is my kind of mission in life right now to introduce people to Italian white wine that's not Pinot Grigio.
Okay.
There's nothing wrong with Pinot Grigio. It has its place, but there is really lovely white wine in all of Italy that is not Pinot Grigio, that is much more interesting. And they're really, it's hard to get a bad one.
Okay.
So you can pick up a pretty reasonably priced bottle of Italian white with a name that you have never heard of, and it is not going to be bad. There's
Okay.
going to be a range of good.
Okay. I like that.
There's a range of good, but you're not going to get something that's not at least moderately good. So Gavi is really nice. It's light. It's very light bodied. This one's got a lot of lemon and lime to it, a little bit of peach, a little bit of that stone fruit thing, and it's very almondy.
Oh, interesting.
Italian white wines often have kind of an almond, either sort of toasted almond or sort of more of a raw almond kind of flavor to them. And it's got some floral sort of notes to it as well. It's very pleasant.
Good.
Gavi has been kind of my go-to summer wine this year, because it is delicious.
Good.
So yeah, so more specific, the better. This next one that I'm gonna tap into is Chenin Blanc from South Africa. But in addition to saying South Africa, it says Western Cape. So it gets a little more specific than just South Africa. It's not highly specific. It doesn't tell me the town that it comes from, but they can all watch my
I could not find anything from South Africa locally.
Oh, really?
Well, at least the stores that had anything on their websites that I could search.
Oh,
I mean, I wasn't about to drive all over town and stop in 8
sure.
places.
No, totally understand.
But
Yeah.
anything that had a searchable website, it's like they hadn't even heard of the continent.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
Yeah.
South Africa puts out a lot of really good wine. Chenin Blanc is sort of the flagship grape of South Africa, especially white grape. They also grow some red grape. They grow Pinotage is unique to South Africa, and they make a lot of that. They do a lot of, it's called Cape blends, which are similar to Bordeaux. They're like Bordeaux-inspired blends with Cabernet, Merlot, things like that, but also with Pinotage in them.
Okay.
That are also good values often, although I'm very careful about South African Cabernet. I've found a lot of it to be very harsh. But the Chenin Blanc is good. And more, Chenin Blanc is also widely produced in the Loire Valley. So if you're getting, I put on the recommendation list, I think, what did I put on?
Yeah, I see that. I did see a bottle. In fact, I may even have bought it and just not opened it tonight, that was labeled Vouvray.
Sure. Yeah. And Vouvray tends to be a little more expensive, so I was questioning whether I should even put it on the list for this, but
I think this one was, I mean, it didn't touch $20. It was maybe 16 or 17.
okay, that's a fair price then. Often it can be more like 25, 30, but
Ah,
so Vouvray and surrounding areas in the Loire Valley will make Chenin Blanc at a variety of sweetness levels. So you have to kind of watch the alcohol content to see how sweet it's going to be,
okay.
because it will not
Well,
tell you.
and the reason I noted that one, and I don't even remember if I bought it and brought it home or not, is that the one lone bottle, I mean, the one lone display of it was right in the middle of all the Rieslings.
Okay.
And I thought, maybe not.
Yeah, perhaps not. Which may or may not have meant anything, but you never know.
Yeah, it may be that's the spot they had on the shelf, because this place didn't have a lot of spots on the shelf.
Right. And I do enjoy off-dry Vouvray. That is a little bit sweet. It goes super well with spicy food, especially like Asian spicy food, or Indian food, those kinds of things. Goes really well with that. Much like a slightly sweet Riesling goes really well with those things. But yeah, Chenin Blanc doesn't have quite the acidity of a Riesling. It's not quite as racy.
And I have a question about Chenin Blanc. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if I'm remembering this correctly, but way back in the day, when I was first learning to drink wine at all, it seems to me that I would buy Chenin Blanc fairly often, but my impression is that was before this tsunami of Chardonnay sort of wiped out everything.
Yes.
And I don't know if I'm remembering that right, or if I was just, being guided by a friend with very specific tastes.
I do think, I wasn't of drinking age at that point, but I do
probably weren't of school age at that point.
Right. So the Chardonnay hit kind of in the 80s, like that it was the big wave of Chardonnay.
Yeah. And I'm talking a decade before that.
Yeah. So before that, there was more of a range of grape varieties available in the US. And I'm not sure whether they were being produced in the US or whether people were drinking more French wine.
Oh, okay.
Which would explain why people would have been drinking more Chenin Blanc. There wasn't a lot of market for US wine until the mid 70s.
Okay.
And there was a whole sort of overturning of how people thought about US wine, and sort of Napa came into prominence in the late 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And then that big Chardonnay kick happened partially as a result of what's called the Judgment of Paris. Are you familiar with the Judgment of Paris? So in 76, there was a wine importer who decided to have a competition, a blind tasting competition between some of the best known French wines and some of the up and comers from Napa.
Okay.
And so he matched them up and brought in some of the best judges and somms from the world and had them blind taste all of these wines and rank them. And the Napa wines won both the red and the white categories.
Wow.
So they were tasting, Cabernet and Chardonnay, basically. Okay. Big categories that they were doing. So they were going up against Bordeaux's. The Cabernets were going up against the best wines from Bordeaux. And the Chardonnays were going up against the best white Burgundy. And the US wines won and sort of began spinning US wine into much more circulation and making it much more respectable. So
interesting.
Yeah. So Chateau Montelena won the Chardonnay competition and became wildly popular. And then all the California wineries started putting out all of these copycat Montelenas.
Okay.
But they also developed this style that was much heavier with the oak, much rounder, much more buttery. People loved it. Yeah, we're still not over it.
And yeah, and I don't enjoy that.
No, but I do introduce people to Chenin Blanc because I think it has enough of a mouthfeel to it to make Chardonnay drinkers happy.
Okay.
Chardonnay drinkers are often not happy with some of the, like a Pinot Grigio or Sauvignon Blanc or some of the Italian whites that are very light.
But it's like a
Uh,
wine cooler.
what?
It's like a wine cooler to them.
Yeah, it just doesn't feel substantial in their
Yeah.
mouth. And it just tastes like fruit. It doesn't taste like anything else. If you're used to drinking something that's more buttery, Chenin Blanc often has a little more malolactic fermentation on it, so it's taken down some of the acid. It's not as acidic to begin with. It's a little rounder, so it's a good like middle step for Chardonnay drinkers.
Okay.
And just pairs really well with food, a variety of types. I think if I don't know what we're eating at a party and I'm bringing a host gift, I often will bring a Chenin Blanc because it goes with everything.
Nice.
And it's not so acidic that you can't drink it alone. So,
Okay.
because sometimes like the wines with a real racy acidity, I really think you need food with it or it gets harsh.
That makes sense.
Yeah. All right. So I feel funny drinking alone over here.
Well, I'm drinking.
Oh, you're right. You are drinking. Good.
I'm drinking. I'm just drinking different stuff than we're talking about.
Yes, which is fine. And then I got this Portuguese red, and I forgot to take the top off of it.
Yeah, I do have a Portuguese red blend. I did not open it tonight,
No.
but it was one of the extras that the salesperson told me about when I bought the wines for last week.
Yeah.
It's called Silk and Spice.
Oh, yeah. Yep. That's a super common, pretty readily available Portuguese red that I think it's a fair representation of some of the things that are happening in Portugal.
Okay.
Silk and Spice is a little more like conscious about playing to an American palate,
Okay.
but it's not unlike other Portuguese reds.
Okay.
If that makes any sense. Yeah, so this one is a Oliveira. This is a small winemaker. I got this through an online service called Naked Wines. And
Okay.
this is another way to find wines that are a little bit different and good. Is like Naked Wines does value pricing. They're in touch with smaller producers, and the way that they
I
make
have seen the name. I just couldn't remember in what context.
yeah, the way they make it work is that if you are a member, you contribute a certain amount of money into your own wallet every month. And then you use that money to buy wine, but they have the money to pay the producers up front.
Sure.
So they can provide the producers a consistent stream of income, which is unusual for small producers.
Mm-hmm.
And then you sort of pop in whenever you're ready to get wine, and you use whatever money's in your wallet, which is great. And other people who are on the service rate the wines, and so something that has had 3,000 people rate it as a 4.8 out of 5, probably pretty good.
Yeah.
And almost nothing on that site is over $20. So
Okay, nice.
yeah. So I'm happy to give a referral code if you ever want to try it.
I don't need it right now, but I'll keep that in mind when that time comes.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so just a Portuguese red blend. Not a lot of specificity to what's in this, and Portugal has a lot of native grapes that are not recognizable anywhere else. So
Okay.
some blend of Portuguese grapes. And I've never had this wine before, and this is super typical of Portuguese wine. So the acid, it's dry, but not sort of drying, so not heavily
Okay.
tannic. The acid is pretty high. Portuguese wines are meant to go well with food, and usually wines that are meant to be drank with food will have a little bit higher acid because that it makes you hungry, it makes you salivate, it goes really well with the sort of umami kinds of things that go on in food.
Sure.
It's like a medium body for a red. It's not heavy at all, which is pretty typical of Portuguese reds. They're not heavy. It's a little warm there. Nobody wants to drink big heavy things. Although I guess I have had some like crazy heavy Portuguese wines that were like 16 to 17% alcohol and like a little overwhelming.
Nice.
This is 13. So a nice light. For a long time, people around the world were making wines to the Robert Parker standard. He's a wine reviewer.
Okay.
And he kind of,
Again, it's a name I've read, but I don't
yeah,
have an association for it.
yeah, he kind of originated the point system for wine, which is helpful in some ways and detrimental in others because the whole world was making wine to Robert Parker's palate. Uh,
Okay.
which is part of how we got a world full of big, heavy cabs and everyone trying to make wine that could match up to big, heavy cabs. But this is not trying to do that. And a lot of new winemakers in this time are not trying to make those kind of wines. They're trying to make lighter, easier, pleasant wines that go well with food, that aren't competing with your food. And they don't really care about Robert Parker.
All right.
Which is kind of nice. This is a great wine. This is a good like wine to bring to a barbecue or cookout.
Oh, okay.
Go with meaty things, but it's like really easy drinking in a glass. Like, and that's my experience with most Portuguese reds is they're just easy to drink and tasty. They've got enough substance to them because this has got a little smoke, a little meatiness to it without being crazy overwhelming.
Okay.
And this is a wine that would make wine nerds happy.
All right.
Yeah. So if you're trying to impress people, that's where we go. It's like, does this make wine nerds happy? The last one that I'm going to do is one that I have from the red
Okay.
class. It's a Rioja. It's a Tempranillo
Oh, okay.
that I have used before. Because thanks to the Corvan, I can just take the same sample. And I think Riojas work well as impressive wines because of some of their similarity to Cabernet. So I just said bad things about big, heavy Cabernet. But I think if you're going into that kind of crowd or you're going to a dinner where you're having steak or burgers and you want something that's going to satisfy American cab people, which we all know there are some out there, like they will largely be satisfied by a Rioja, especially if it is a Crianza or Reserva or Gran Reserva that has some oak on it.
Okay.
The ones that are not labeled with any of those labels do not necessarily have time on oak, or it's not regulated, but a Crianza has to have 6 months. A Reserva has to have 12 months. A Gran Reserva has to have 18 months. And so when they have more oak on them, they have a little more of that tannic structure that people are used to in a cab.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah. So that's if I need to pull out something that's going to impress my Camus loving friends, then I will bring them Rioja.
Mhm.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, I'm trying to think of sort of what else I have to say about these things.
I don't know if this fits in the budget category or if this is maybe a future tasting on its own,
Sure.
but I've been seeing a little bit of growing publicity for what they're calling clean wines. You know, and one I happened to encounter through an online direct sales party, and the woman represented this company called Scout and Cellar. And
Okay.
I looked on the website and I couldn't actually get her to acknowledge what the company was.
Sure.
I mean, I said, from what I see, everything you show on your website is somebody else's label.
Yeah.
So it sounds to me like you're an online retailer that focuses on these clean wines.
Mm-hmm.
Well, she didn't want to go there. Apparently, that's not their company messaging.
Right. Yeah. So clean wines are a whole. Yes, this probably does need to be like a
That's
separate.
Maybe that's a whole different tasting or class or something.
Yeah, I mean, it needs to be something. I think there's a lot of things out on the market right now that are deceptive, and clean wines are one of them. As are like low cal, no sugar added wines, which are a big thing right now. I mean, they probably are better for you than the average like bulk produced wine.
Okay.
That is full of chemicals. So what they mean by clean is that it's organically farmed and that it has minimal intervention. So minimal chemicals added during vinification, no extra sugar added, all of those things. I just call that good wine. Like that, it doesn't have to be this clean wine movement, and it doesn't have to be marketed by Gwyneth Paltrow. Those are just good wines. Mm-hmm. That are being produced by all kinds of people who just don't have the tagline for it. So when people come and ask me about, I want this wine that's no sugar, I'm like, well, great, like this label says no sugar, but I also have these 4,000 wines that do not have sugar added to them. Like, you're saving yourself 10 calories and taking away all of the taste.
Yeah.
And that Scout and Cellar and Aveline is the brand that I think Gwyneth Paltrow or Cameron Diaz or someone is doing. They're also like, some of them are like multi-level marketing schemes.
That's exactly what this is.
Yeah. Yeah. So I just continue to.
That was a no for me.
Yeah.
But I just was curious about what she was talking about.
Yeah,
and,
I mean,
I found it very intriguing that she wouldn't admit that they are a fancied up online retailer.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm not opposed at all to the kind of methods that they're using, and all those wines are vegan, which wine is not necessarily vegan.
Okay.
Because often egg whites are used as a fining agent.
Oh, okay.
Have been for thousands of years. That's just so. Wine is often not vegan, but this, clean wine is, it hasn't used synthetic pesticides, it hasn't used synthetic additives. They're not adding sweetener, and vegan. But, like I also can point you toward a bazillion other wines that have that description.
Sure.
That taste better and are not MLMs.
All good things.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I
yeah.
haven't even heard of this, except that this woman was part of this other MLM party that I was attending to support a friend.
Right. Yeah. Well, they're sort of, where they do irritate me is that they are making a lot of money on disinformation. So all of these people who come in being like, I'm allergic to sulfites. Like, well, no, you're not, because they're in everything. Like, have you ever eaten a French fry? Did you get a headache from it? Because there are way more sulfites in French fries or dried fruit or literally anything than there are in wine. So unless you're walking around with a headache all the time, every time you eat, I don't really think that's it. Yeah. And all the sugar stuff. And I'm like, well, unless you're talking about mass produced commodity American wine, there's not sugar added to the vast majority of the wine that you're drinking. So, yeah. So another class for another day, or another article.
or another blog post.
Yeah. And I continue to try to inform people who come into the store about, like, sulfites are not the devil. That is not what's giving you a headache. You're probably drinking bad wine and too much of it. Like,
oh, well.
I don't know. But yeah. Any other questions for today?
No, not really. This is really helpful. I mean, the general guidelines about choosing lesser known regions and lesser known grapes. It means I have to do a little homework if I want to get a good wine at a low price point, but that's okay.
Yeah.
That's why God made Google.
Yeah. Yep. So. And mostly I'm trying to help people be a little bit open to wines you may not have heard of or wines you haven't tried, and trusting that you can try something new, and where you might get it, that you could be confident that it's going to be something that's not trash, that you're not going to hate it.
Yeah.
It's not going to go down the drain. It may not be your favorite thing that you ever had.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Good,
but like, if you're going to show up at a party full of wine nerds and you bring a bottle of Gavi or Chenin Blanc, no one is going to be sad.
This is good.
Right. This is my goal. Everyone will be happy. My manager and I walked around the department today looking at the entire Italian white section. We're like, yeah, pretty much anything from this section.
Mm-hmm.
There's not another 12 feet in the store that we would both be like, yeah, anything here would make me delighted to drink it.
I love that you have an Italian white section. I mean, yeah. This little store I went to today, and Hy-Vee I think is a little better than that, but the store I stopped into today would have probably about an Italian white 3 feet.
Yes. Well, that's pretty good, actually. We have a whole aisle of Italian.
Okay.
With a long aisle of Italian, and we have the reds on one side, geographically arranged.
Okay.
We have all the Pinot Grigio in one little. We have probably 6 feet of Pinot Grigio, and then we have 12 to 14 feet of other Italian whites.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is this store may be a destination point in a pilgrimage someday.
Right. We do. If you ever get to Cincinnati, people do come and see our store just to marvel at how large it is.
Well, if I do, I will book an hour of your time and
Oh, for
make
sure.
sure my trunk is empty when I get there.
Absolutely. Yes. And come when it's cooler so you don't have to worry about your wine cooking in the car.
Well, there is that.
All right. Well, thank you again for coming. And
Thank you. And I'm looking forward. I'm already registered for the bubbly class next week.
yeah, I'm excited about that one.
I think that'll be fun.
Yes.
And like I said, that one, I just have to decide, since I couldn't find the single serve of the things I wanted, it's like, there's only so much of this I'm going to open on one day.
right. I mean, I think if you're going to get, so you got a Prosecco, right?
I got a Prosecco and I have a Cava.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, if you're willing to open two bottles, that will give you the comparison points you need, I think. But if you're able to find smaller bottles, you can always.
What I was hoping to find was a single serve bottle of a true champagne,
Yeah.
not the stuff that's called California champagne.
Right. So that's, I mean, ideally what you would have is something like a Prosecco that's made in a tank method and something that's traditional method, ideally champagne, but Cava is also traditional method. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. Well, that will be fun. I will look forward to that.
Great. Sounds good. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Well, thank you. I feel totally spoiled to have an hour of your undivided attention like this.
Well, it